President, I'm delighted to join my colleagues from Massachusetts and Hawaii to talk about the tax credits for wind. We have had a remarkably exciting new thing happen in Rhode Island this summer. From time to time, I'm able to get out on Narragansett Bay, and over again, whether driving on the bridges over Narragansett Bay or actually out on Narragansett Bay, we saw the sights of these enormous barges traveling down the bay, bringing these huge structures that were carried out, located off of Block Island, and sunk to the ocean floor to provide the platforms for the first steel-in-water offshore wind energy in the country. Now, you can go over to Europe and you can see wind energy all over the place. We're behind them in developing it, but Rhode Island is the start. And whether you saw these enormous structures that were the legs, the frames for the pylon and the turbine, or whether you saw enormous pilings that get carried out there, and in the same way that you drive a nail through the hole in a hanger and put it in the wall, they take these enormous pilings that reach way up into the sky and drive them through the hollow legs of the framework and down to anchor them in the ocean floor. And so this is under construction right now, and it's big. You see these barges coming by you. They are enormous. The structure is around hundreds of feet in the air. It's exciting to see this happening, and it's part of the wind revolution that Senator Markey and Senator Schatz talked about. So there's a conflict in my mind between this exciting sight in Rhode Island, these big yellow structures coming down the bay in the bright light, and then coming to the darker halls of Congress and moving from that exciting sight to the tedious fight that we have over and over to protect the wind production tax credit. Over and over, we have to go through this fight. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. It's because opposition to the wind tax credit is one more little wriggling tentacle of the fossil fuel industry. They have huge tax subsidies, tax credits, and tax advantages baked permanently into the tax code. And they sit on those, and they defend them, and they're merciless about anybody who tries to take those away. But let little wind come along and try to get a competing tax credit of its own, and they try to crush it. Over and over and over. Nobody runs for office to come to the Senate and say, you know, the thing that drives me, the thing that motivates my candidacy is to make sure that our wind energy in the United States gets knocked down. Let's take their little tax credit away. Nobody runs on that. In fact, if I recall correctly, the presiding officer ran for the office with a picture of a wind turbine in Colorado. So it's not as if there aren't friends to wind in this chamber, but once you get here, the oil and fossil guys, they are very powerful, they are very remorseless, they have made immense threats to squash any action on climate change, and as a little sidebar, they always try to beat the little wind energy subsidy. They'll never give up their own, and their own are much bigger. We have probably $50 billion over 10 years in cash tax benefits to these companies, which are the most profitable companies in the history of the planet. They're the last companies that need any help. And if you look at people like the International Monetary Fund, not exactly a liberal green group, the International Monetary Fund estimates that if you put in all the subsidies that fossil fuel gets around the world, it adds up to more than $5 trillion. You know, I'm from Rhode Island. I think $1 million is a lot of money. I'm starting to get used to talking about billions of dollars down here. Trillions. is what the fossil fuel subsidy in effect is around the world. And just in the US, it's $700 billion in a year. And yet, greedy big corporations that sit and defend that benefit to the last trench, they also want to go and crush the poor little wind benefit. It's just not fair and it's just wrong. But I think we're going to be able to prevail. We have seen some real progress here. Bloomberg just published an article that wind power is now the cheapest electricity to produce, cheaper than anything else in both Germany and in the United Kingdom. It's a powerful industry in states like Colorado and in Wyoming, where they have so much wind that they export wind energy to other states. Iowa's probably our leader. Iowa generates nearly 30% of its electricity from wind. TPI Composites is a Rhode Island company. It builds composite materials in Warren, Rhode Island. Well, they've got a facility in Iowa where they manufacture wind turbine blades. And in the last decade, they've manufactured 10,000 wind turbine blades. There had been a Maytag factory in a town called Newton, Iowa. And the Maytag factory went bust because, of course, we're offshoring jobs to China. But guess what? They came in and started building these wind turbines. And they're really too big to ship from China. So it's been a boom industry. It's put little Newton back on its feet. And if we don't pass the wind production tax credit, then states like Wyoming and Colorado and Iowa that depend on this are really going to be hurt. This is bipartisan in these states. I don't know why the fossil fuel industry primarily runs its mischief through the Republican Party here in Congress, but it doesn't work in Iowa. In Iowa, a year ago, the Iowa State Senate unanimously passed a resolution supporting extension of the production tax credit. Unanimously. So we have a really strong case to make that this is the technology of the future. We have a fairness case to make that the great, big, brutal fossil fuel lobbyist organization shouldn't be allowed to hold on to all of its subsidies, depending on how you measure them, measuring into the hundreds of billions of dollars, and at the same time try to squash poor little wind when it wants to get some subsidies in order to compete with this massive and malevolent incumbent. And then I think we have the practical politics of this, which is in state after state after state, wind has become real enough that it's going to be very hard for some of our colleagues on the Republican side to go home and say to their home state wind industry, sorry, we put you under the bus. We put you under the bus. We protected your competitors in oil and gas. We absolutely would never touch them. We protected them. They're sacrosanct on our side, but we put you under the bus. That's going to be a little hard to explain. So I hope very much that as we come together and pull together the continuing resolution or the omnibus that avoids, I pray, another shutdown and that puts our country on a sensible budgetary footing going forward, that this tax credit is a part of it because we need these jobs. People are working in Rhode Island. And I tell you what, when you're building a ginormous, big frame offshore, you are paying good wages. You're paying good wages to the people who operate the barges. You're paying good wages to the iron workers and the steel workers and the electrical workers. You're paying good wages to the stevedores who are helping load it up. These are really strong economic businesses, and we want to support them. And with that, I will yield the floor. And I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.